All right, welcome. It's Todd, the Run to Daylight podcast, stream, whatever you want to call it, Bestball Study Hall. Very interesting conversation based on something that Hayden Winks, whose work I am a huge fan of. I just happen to disagree with him on his point, so I want to go into why. He basically made the point that if the decision on diversification simply comes down to um, it just simply comes down to one thing, which is your risk tolerance. And, he's not wrong, right? But I want to show you why you shouldn't have so much risk tolerance, especially in the early rounds of best ball. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to show you my work. I am thinking of starting a Patreon. If you're interested in that, DM me for more information. I asked some sites to be interested in my work, and I don't know if it's because I'm old or I suck. Could be either. I haven't gotten any bites, so I am thinking of just going Patreon. I think that this advance rate stuff is just too good to give away, frankly. And I won't hype that too much. I'm here to go over this one thing. But if you are interested, just let me know. All right, so let's go over to the work that I did. So what you're going to see here is this is FFPC. I'm going to do underdog after FFPC is done. So this is your player when he was drafted and what his advance rate was last year, which means coming in first or second place and moving on to the next round of the tournament. I heard Justin Herzig say something interesting on Billy Musio's pod that I agree with. Most of my focus is on advancing, not figuring out what made it through. At the same time, you need to build lineups to get through. And if I do the Patreon, that will certainly be, we will certainly discuss strategies on how to advance as well, somewhere along the line. All right, so this is year to year. Now, there was no best ball tournament in the FFPC the year before, so I took win rate from all the slims, which is the same format, and I doubled it, and that's what you're seeing in 2020. So you'll notice Christian McCaffrey, average percent of advancing is 17%, right? 8.5 times 2. An average player is going to advance 17% of the time. So Christian McCaffrey drafted 1-1, was hurt a lot, but only down to 13%. Dalvin down to 13. Kelsey at 17. Kamara at 12. Henry at 17. 13 for Ezekiel Elliott. 19 for Devontae Adams. 11 for Waller. 21 for Hill. 30 for Eckler. He's the big winner of round one. And 14 for Stephon Diggs. Let's see, did I do that? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. All right. So that's round one, right? And the first thing you notice is there's not a lot of wild swings. And the point I'm going to make is let's look at the year before, right? Now, you know what? Let's look at round two. So round two, you have Jones 17, Barkley 9, Najee 28, Hopkins 10, Kittle 16, Chubb 17, and there you see it. Calvin Ridley 4%, and that's the reason why you diversify. Imagine if you had 50% of your teams or 40% of your teams with Calvin Ridley, and they only had a 4% chance of getting out of round one. Never mind advancing. You can't break even just by advancing. You need, a percentage of your teams to get into the next week and a percentage of your teams to get into the next week if you hope to be profitable. Now, the right after that, you'll see Jonathan Taylor at 48%. So you would argue, if I had 50% Jonathan Taylor, I would have had a monster season. True. But, you might like Jonathan Taylor more than Calvin Ridley. You might like him enough to give him 50% ownership and Ridley 4, right? But you have no idea. You had no idea that Calvin Ridley was going to walk out let's call it an injury, right? Like he was injured. He was out for the year. What if the injury was mental? He was still out for the year. And Jonathan Taylor was healthy. You have no idea. You have no control over who gets hurt. Now, you'll see a column here with his win rate, and a part of the Patreon would be me going and showing my win rate for these players, my advance rate for these players. And it's very, very interesting. And I'm not going to go into it because it doesn't address the point that I make about diversification without giving away the whole thing. But that is why you diversify, because you have no control. I don't care. An analogy I came up with that I really like is when it comes to picking players, a lot of people act like they have 20/20 vision when really we only see, basic shapes. We're all a little bit nearsighted, right? Now, you might have, if you told me that you had Jonathan Taylor 80 points ahead of Calvin Ridley or 100 points ahead of him, I would have told you, okay, then Jonathan Taylor should have been going here. Anyway, the point is, this is the only place in the draft when you look at the whole board, and this is part of the Patreon, but when you look at the whole board, look at Raheem Mostert, who missed the whole season and was drafted right next to Deebo Samuel, who also crushed. Deebo only had a 33% win rate and Mostert an 8% win rate. So advance rate, I'm so trained in win rates. Advance rate. So basically what you've got here is this phenomenon of, let's look at it the year before. So this year it was round 2. So you'd say, well, round 1 was really even. Well, it was really even because nobody really broke out in this area. The year before, that wasn't the case. You had Christian McCaffrey getting hurt, and he had a 5% advance rate. Saquon Barkley had a 2% advance rate. I mean, imagine if 50% of your lineups had Saquon Barkley because you were lucky enough to get the second pick that often, and you just loved him so much. Or a better example might be Michael Thomas. Let's say you had Michael Thomas as your 1-2 last year. So you were taking him every time you had the 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7. And when he fell here and you got up to 40% Michael Thomas, well, guess what? You ain't making money. In fact, you're losing a lot of money. I mean, you literally then would need one lineup to win it all to hope to be profitable, basically. So here you see just how wide the first and the second round is based on injury. McCaffrey didn't have a bad year. Barkley didn't have a bad year. You didn't choose that Kamara was going to be better than these guys because he wasn't better because we don't know. But what we do know is these guys got hurt and he didn't. Zeke had a bad year and look, but he played and he got 11%. Dalvin Cook, 22. Derrick Henry, 22. Kelsey, 39%. This is the FFPC, 1.5 points per tight end. So second round is pretty flat. You don't see anything like Ridley. But in general, that is why you diversify. Because even if you're not as smart as you think you are. Because, I know a guy who had a great year picking players, had a big year, and the next year he did the same thing, 40, 50, 60% ownership on guys, and they all bombed, got hurt. And I haven't seen him as a major best ball investor since because he lost his bankroll. Okay? So, yes, Hayden's point is if this money is just money you're playing with for fun and you can afford to reload and you don't mind losing all your money, sure, it's a matter of risk tolerance. But to me, it's not the smartest way to play. Justin Herzig also said he has other edges. And so I'm not saying, first and second round be 8.5% on everyone. No. But I do feel that 2x in the first 2 rounds is about the max that I want to take a chance on a guy. And I don't want to be, let's say, like I was down on Alvin Kamara this year because I thought with Alvin Kamara and Michael Thomas, neither one of them had a very good chance to crush. Well, Michael Thomas got hurt. I didn't account for that possibility, right? So having, two or three, I had a bad year. I only had like 3% Alvin Kamara in the first round. That's why I went back to what had worked for me in the past, and sticking to, in the most part, between 5 and 15% on guys in the first and second round, unless, there's just somebody who I feel is just completely mispriced in the bad way or in a good way. But even then, I'll only go maybe a little more than 15 simply because we don't know if that guy's going to get hurt or not. And if he does, you're going to get a 2%. You're going to get a 2% or a 5% or a 4%. And that's what you want to avoid by diversifying. So that's the basics. Couple other things I want to talk about is how notice how the finish affects next year's ADP. Julio, 24%. Boy, that's a mistake. I think that's more like 2%. Hold on. Yeah, he's 10%. So Julio ended up in the 5th round because he had a bad year. Now he's in the 13th round because he had back-to-back bad years. Aaron Jones had a good year. His ADP moved up here. I mean, this isn't rocket science. Chris Godwin, 9%. But what it can do is show you where the values are, right? So Chris Godwin, the next year, went in the 4th, 5th round. He had a good win percentage the following year. I use Fantasy Mojo for a lot of this information. I should have said that earlier. You can use that as a way to find values the following year. Don't let the last thing you've seen affect everything that you do, whether it's on a player or in, like, if you had looked at this, you'd say, oh, first round, I have to come to some conclusions. Well, this year, now you're looking at this and saying, well, I can't get hurt in the first round. Look, nobody was less than 13%. I can really go hog wild on a guy. Well, if he gets hurt, you're going to get 2%. All right. Personal win rate, there's some really interesting things. Couple things. If I do the Patreon, I will go through the rest of the board, break it down like this. I'll also break it down by position. I think looking at the player advance rate, let's say quarterback, and looking at their round, where they're going now, where they went last year and where they're going now. Win rates aren't everything, but I think they give you a great insight into further study. We'll also discuss if I do a Patreon, I will make my tiers available. I'll talk about my tiebreakers, how to supercharge teams for tourneys, and then I'll do it all again for Underdog, Bestball Study Hall for DraftKings. Anyway, that's about it. I want to thank you guys. I got some questions. Jose wanted to know, interesting to know at what round you would not worry about player exposure. There's no round I don't worry about it, right? And in the beginning, I'm more worried about injury. In the later rounds, I'm more interested in correlating and stacking, right? So since in the early rounds, I'm not going to have more than a 15% ownership on pretty much any quarterback. That's another story. Quarterback and tight end win rates in full PPR and half PPR tend to not be as extreme as wide receivers and tight ends. So I tend not to have more than 15% on a quarterback. So late in the draft, I'm looking to stack and correlate. So that's going to, and the changing news over the season is going to mix up my correlation. Jose also said, max percentage on player ownership for you in round 1 or 2, 15%. Jose, that's the most I want. Now, that's dependent on my volume, right? I'm going to be doing somewhere around 200 on underdog this year, maybe even a little more. I got to see how things go. And on FFPC, I'll probably, it's $125. I'll probably, it depends on how many partnerships I have, but I'll be close to 100, if not over again. I did 131 last year. So you have to figure out what's best for you. If I was only doing 30 teams and doing this for fun, exposure means a lot less to me. When we talk about this, we are assuming you're going to be a volume player. So, but you can do that now with the mitten. You could put in 100 mitten teams for $500, or 80 for 400, so it's not hard to do it. Kevin Wheeler jumped in and said was way overloaded on acres and MT last year. Yeah, and that's it. That's the variance. Now, you might have been right. Acres and MT. I was over on MT when he got hurt, but I was in the low, right around 20%, and he got hurt in preseason, so I backed off. And so I ended up, I forget exactly, I was overweight, but I only had like 10 or 13%. That's the other thing. If you were only at 20 something percent and a guy gets hurt in preseason, you still have time to do more drafts to lower that that ownership percentage. Jose, how many best ball drafts do you have to be in before you consider player ownership? I mean, that's up to you. I know I'm going to do enough that I'm going to consider it. But I mean, somewhere around 50. Last question. Do I only play in best ball tournaments? Right now, yes. I used to grind the other ones, and honestly, I mean, this is a lot of fun for me, and I'm looking for life-changing money. Now, I got to the final 12 in the FFPC tournament, 100 grand on top. That's not life-changing money, but it's life-altering money. It takes a lot of stress away. And at my age, that's what excites me. Grinding to, the 1 year that I put 3,000 in and ground out about 3,000 in profit. There was nothing wrong with that. I just don't have interest in it now. I'm only doing the tourneys. So I want to thank the people who watched. If you're interested in my Patreon, let me know. DM me. I really would like to find somewhere around 20 people to get started. If I'm going to give away all this information, it's just too good. It's just too good to give away for free is my thought. I will talk about it on my free pods. I'll reference it, but I'm not going to go into deep teaching, and I'm certainly not going to share my tears and how I look at that. That should be a pay thing, I think. Anyway, that's going to do it. I know it kind of dipped from the original point of Hayden into my own life and wants of Patreon, but I feel like I showed why you shouldn't be so willing to take on risk, especially in the early rounds. It does change as you go along. I will cover that at another time, most likely. Thanks, guys. Have a good day.